Good evening. The time is 6 p.m. I'd like to call to order the October 14th, 2020 Keizer Planning Commission meeting.
Microphones are on and close enough to your mouth. Thank you.
Okay. Debbie has noted the attendance. We have one commissioner participating via the phone. Thank you, Commissioner Keizer, for taking the time tonight to call in. So first order of business, I'm excited that tonight we get to have two new planning commissioners swear in. Tonight we'll be welcoming Jane Herb and Francisco Saldivar to the Planning Commission. So if we can go ahead and get that going. And City Attorney Johnson will be doing that, and I'll try to take pictures.
Jane, please rise and raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I, Jane Herb, being first duly sworn, upon oath say, that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Oregon, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of a planning commissioner for the City of Keizer according to the best of my ability for my term of office. Congratulations. And Francisco?
Here's what's on.
And please repeat after me. Oops, just a minute. I, Francisco Salvador,
I, Francisco Saldivar,
being first duly sworn,
upon oath say,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Oregon, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of a planning commissioner for the City of Keizer according to the best of my ability for my term of office. And if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, City Attorney.
I'm going to take this off here. I can't talk with that on very well. My apologies. I would have worn a tie, which I usually do for swearing it in, but I forgot. So, and I have the oaths here afterwards. We actually need to get them signed, so please don't take off. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Pleasure. Congratulations and welcome to the Planning Commission. As you'll no doubt find, you're diving into the deep end of some pretty interesting and important stuff. We have an amazing planning staff here at the City of Keizer. We have great resources that will help guide you along the way. But again, thank you for being willing to take this volunteer position. I sincerely look forward to working with both of you. With that being said, we have the election of the chair and vice chair. Tonight we're going to elect both the chair and the vice chair. In a moment, I will open the nominations for the chair first, then the vice chair. If we have only one nomination, then we will approve by unanimous consent. If not, we'll take a vote among the commissioners. So now I'll go ahead and open the nomination. Well, before I open the nominations, I will say that if the commission will have me, I would be more than happy to stay on as your chair. This last year has been tremendously rewarding in terms of the opportunity to help assist with this group. Anyways, I will go ahead and open the nominations for the chair position.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, Mark Keizer, I would like to nominate Matt Lawyer for chair and Jeff Watson for vice chair as a slate.
Okay.
As a slate?
As a slate. So
that's the ticket, Mark.
So if I don't get approved, that means you don't get approved.
Might hitch into the wrong wagon here.
Maybe. Okay, so we have a nomination for myself, Commissioner Lawyer as chair, and Commissioner Watson as vice chair. Is there any other nominations? All right, hearing none, we will elect Commissioner Lawyer as the chair and Commissioner Watson as the vice chair by unanimous consent. That was easy. Thank you for your trust in me to continue this job for another year. And I want to congratulate my friend Commissioner Jeff Watson on becoming the Planning Commission Vice Chair. I hope to make his job as easy as possible.
And thank you for your confidence, fellow commissioners. I hope to serve well. Thank you.
All right, moving on, we have the approval of minutes for the September 16th, 2020 Planning Commission minutes. May I have a motion on the minutes, please?
So moved.
We have a
Second.
motion. Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Grants and a second by Commissioner Watson to approve as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Debbie, thank you as always. Next order of business is the appearance of interested citizens. We have one person in the audience, but they'll be presenting here shortly. Anybody signed up, Debbie, that we know of? No? Okay. Moving right along. Tonight, we do not have any public hearings, so we will move on to the new old business and the staff report. We will hear about a Keizer Growth Transportation Impact Study, presentation by our consultant, DKS, and Mr. Carl Springer from DKS is here. Mr. Witham, I'll turn it over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair Lawyer. So tonight, Carl Springer is here. He's the project manager on this project. This is the infamous cost of growth on the impacts transportation system study that we never could quite figure out the title. So it is the Keizer Growth Transportation Impact Study, which was in your packet. There's a document in there with a lot of numbers. So Carl is going to explain every single number tonight to let you know what each one of those means. Not really, he won't do that. But he is going to kind of give us an overview of the project, what we found out, and ultimately what we're asking as staff tonight from the commission is that after going through the presentation, if you have questions, I chatted with Carl briefly. He's fine with entertaining questions as we go. If you have questions that you want to ask, go ahead and fire away. We'll just kind of have it be a conversational tone. But ultimately what my hope was tonight is that after you kind of receive this information, and it is a pretty technical piece of work, it's not like, hey, Carl, you should change those traffic count numbers. That's not really an option. But what we're asking the commission to do is basically recommend that the city council approve the study. That's kind of part of what will happen, and my city attorney has said that that's going to happen by like a resolution apparently at council to kind of lock it in place as a true piece of work that we can use as we're informing our decision-making process for our future planning horizon. Anyway, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carl Springer. So.
Thanks. Do I need to touch anything? Or am I good? Yes, do that, please.
I think you're good.
Okay, thank you. Everyone hear me all right? Yes. So again, I'm Carl Springer with DKS Associates. I'm a principal in that office, and I've been doing planning like this in Oregon for about 25 years, so I know a thing or two. That's why I'm happy to take your questions as we go through here, especially you new recruits. If things don't make any sense, feel free to ask her. So what we're presenting tonight is an overview of the material that was in your packet, and I'm hoping to focus in on what I think are the key pieces of it, but again, happy to answer any questions as we go. So we're going to walk a little bit through kind of the bigger issues that need to be considered as you're going through an expansion process, and that's what I would call this. I've been involved in a number of different cities and counties where they have considered taking land inside the UGB, and there's a very clear and delineated process that you have to do to make that happen and keep all the local agencies happy. And so we're going to outline that in brief. So as part of the expansion process, there's lots of things to consider. Transportation is one of them. It's not the only one, but it is one of the more expensive ones, I would say, in general. Through our study, we looked at two different land use growth options up in the north end of the city, and then the last piece is a little bit on what we've learned. So into the expansion process. So these first 2 points they may seem obvious to the casual observer. I've done plenty of plans where those things weren't necessarily true. But the essential piece is anytime, so when you guys are considering growth,
wherever it may be in the city or just near the city, you need, one of the first principles is that you have adequate transportation facilities for that growth area, which can be tricky when you're talking about putting growth in what was formerly rural areas. So you've got little, a different standard of road in that area and a different spacing of road in that area. When you put urban development on top of that, a lot of things must change in the road side of it. So the first thing is you need to upgrade to an urban class road out there. And the city has standards for doing that. And they know what a collector road looks like and what an arterial road looks like. And those standards get applied in those cases. And then through this study, we need to demonstrate that the roads can operate safely and operate within a reasonable expectation of what the city is requiring. We talked about, intersection congestion and those kinds of things. That's a test to make sure that we've got the right mix of roads set up for that growth area. The second big piece is to have a funding plan. Again, it seems intuitively obvious. If you're running your household, you probably should have a funding plan for your household. The same is true for growth areas. The same is true for citywide transportation system plans. The state will want to see that you have a reasonable expectation to fund those improvements that are needed to support the growth. That funding gets paid for by a number of different ways, but still the thinking and the process of how that's going to happen needs to be identified. So again, our work looked at an illustrative kind of investment up on the north end. We looked at two different land use concepts. These aren't what I would call committed plans. These are just illustrations. So they have no weight in terms of, the official capacity of a concept planning process. We're just doing this as an educational piece for the city to understand what's involved. So we as traffic engineers look at things called how much traffic is added. We look at the performance, and then we identify improvements. So improvements to us, usually in this case, means new roads or expanded existing roads or upgraded traffic control at major intersections. It's some combination of those things. So far, so good. I'm 3 slides in and I don't see any quizzical looks. We're okay so far? Good, all right. So we targeted about 2 dozen intersections around the city, and it was in the growth area and quite a ways to the south at what the city felt were the kind of the sensitive bottlenecks of the city system today. And so we wanted to make sure that those intersections continue to perform okay, even when the growth is added. Funny thing is, each agency has their own roads in the city. So ODOT has some roads, and Marion County has some roads, and the city of Keizer has some roads. And each one has a different way of measuring what's success in terms of how well it performs. Makes it interesting for guys like me because we have different metrics for what is success on each of those facilities. But regardless, we have to go through and do that analysis and show that once the growth is there, you can meet your standard. That's a key piece of this. All right, so we did a few scenarios. Now, scenarios are just different cases that we looked at. And the forecast here, so imagine yourself in the year 2043. 2020 is a distant memory. In fact, you can't even remember much about it except it was bad. That's really all you remember. And so here we are in 2023. We do a scenario where neither growth option is applied. We do a scenario with just one growth option, which is the lesser of the two, and then the second one is the larger of the two. We'll get into the complications of that. I should note, and it's mentioned in the report, but I want to make sure I understand. So part of that future assessment considers a roster of projects that have been identified in previous projects. It's noted there as being as a part of the regional transportation system plan. That's something your local MPO does. There's a roster of projects up in that part of the city that were assumed to be constructed as a part of this work. And the total for that cost is mentioned later in the slides, but I'll just tell you, totals up to $16 million worth of investment. So that was the starting point.
And that's all 3 scenarios, assume that all those projects
Yes.
that are slated go by? Okay.
Yes, because it's in the financially constrained plan for that horizon year. So the expectation is the funding to invest to make those projects come true will be there.
Okay, thank you.
So let's see. So as we go iteratively through this analysis, we find where the system works and doesn't work with the growth, and then we start to layer in improvements to meet the city standards and to meet the performance targets. And that helps us to build a project list up in that area that would be required to support the growth. The last piece is to go through and do a cost estimate of what it would be actually to construct those projects. So that was a lot on that one slide. Let me pause there. Everybody doing okay? So far, so good?
I have one question.
Sure.
Following up on Jeff's question, that 16 million that you mentioned,
Right.
who's responsible for that?
That would be the city of Keizer. That's in, I believe that's, well, I shouldn't say that. That, I don't know that that's all, those all.
100% City of Keizer.
Is it 100%?
I don't
It's
know if
usually,
it
it's
is.
usually a mix.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what the breakdown, we just wanted to acknowledge that there's a significant investment in addition to the numbers that we're talking about here in
Okay,
this
so
report.
this is for those, the RTSP that's
Right.
already baked in.
They're already baked into the plans that you have adopted to date.
Okay.
So those are identified, committed plan projects, including, like making improvements on Wheatland Road would be one of them. So that was assumed to be an improvement that would occur regardless of whether growth happens in this area. That's kind of the way we look at it. Even if nothing happened in the growth area, these projects would advance and get funded and get built.
Okay, thank you, understood.
So quick clarification, and I'm just going to catch this because I have an ear for these things. You said MPO, Metropolitan
sorry.
Planning Organization. That's just fine.
Acronym morning, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Just want to make it clear for any of the audience that may not understand that acronym. Thank you.
So, MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, that's your local group that's responsible for that document called the Regional Transportation System Plan. They look at the regional needs for both Salem and Keizer together. And so that's their focus kind of on the higher level system. All right, so at the end of the slides, we talk about not just what's the dollar total, but kind of what does it mean in terms of the investment. I mean, because, these dollars are kind of abstract when you say it's 10 or 20 or 30 million dollars. What is that? What's the context for that? And so we try to go through and compare that, and we'll provide the findings of that a little bit later in the presentation. Just want to highlight, though, that funding for these things happens a number of different ways, and they're kind of listed there. So at the time of development, there's a number of improvements that get built by developers. That's just part of the development process. So that's step one. Step two is system development charges, pay for a good share of growth, project growth. And then your local partners oftentimes are responsible or help support capital projects on their facilities. So that's just the nature of the world. Everybody has to chip in and to make these improvements on the greater system. But it's important to understand what that plan is. So on to growth option number one. So here we are at the north end of the city. That arrow, that lopsided arrowhead shape there along River Road is option number one. It's the smaller of the two. It provides a combination of industrial and commercial jobs, and also there's development assumed along the River Road Cherry Overlay District as shown to the south. So we looked at that as the first land use case. This graphic illustrates kind of where the trips to and from that growth area would go, at least during the peak hours of the day. So the fatter the line, the heavier level of use. That's basically what that tells you. And so up on this one case, you have 350 or so vehicle trips to and from that one site, primarily accessing via River Road or a side street up there called Perkins Street. Does that graphic make sense to everybody? All right, so that's a tool that's an output from a calculation tool that we use to tell us what routes growth in those areas will use, and that helps inform where road projects will work and not work, or where improvements are needed. So the last step for option number one is to identify some improvement projects, and it's listed there. One in Perkins Street, one in River Road. The total for those improvements for all parties is about 17 million, which is in addition to that 16 million I mentioned. So we're adding, we're not, it's not a comparison. All right, on to number 2. So number 2 is quite a bit bigger. As you can see, it spans all the way to I-5 from River Road. And it includes a mix of uses plus a pretty significant portion of housing development. So that's what's different, is a much larger area and a different mix of uses in this case. Plus, to support an area that large, there's actually brand new streets that need to be built because you're kind of out in the farmland there. And to do a suburban style housing development, you need additional streets to support it. So in this case, instead of 350 trips, we have 1,600 trips, so significantly more, 5 times if you read the notes. And you can see the dispersion of the trips is much more balanced on both sides, east and west, access being to both freeway interchanges. You've got the Chemawa interchange to the south, and then the, what's the name of that, Brook Lake interchange to the north. So it's a much more balanced dispersion, kind of broader area. So it really had incremental impacts on a larger number of locations. And as you can imagine, when you talk in a larger development like that, you have a larger list of projects. And so that's the list there. It's the same as the one that's in the report. The total there is about 2 times what the other site provided. So about $36 million.
If you're going to go into this later, just tell me to wait. I think I'm seeing River Road at 19 million for growth option 2, and it was 12 million for the first. This is just due to it extending further north?
More frontage, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's you're right. That's the difference. And again, I should emphasize that these are total dollar amounts. How that gets split up between who's responsible for those dollars hasn't been done yet. It doesn't mean that it would be all on the city necessarily.
Not even a ballpark estimate of,
Well,
in general, these things
yeah,
tend to
I
go
mean,
this
they're
much
useful
city,
for
this much
comparing
county.
The scale, right? But as far as, some of these projects could be built, through other means as opposed to putting it all on the growth.
Yeah.
Because that's what I found in other urban planning areas when you're doing a 500-acre chunk of land right next to the urban area, but it's all farmland, and so they have to build the entire road system from scratch, and that's not a burden that most housing development can support, and so you have to figure out a way to share those costs. That's kind of what I'm saying.
All right, thank you.
All right, so this is a synopsis of the findings from the prior slides. 300 trips, 1,600 trips, $17 million, $37 million. I think what we tried to do here is to kind of look at the efficiency of the investment, and the indicator that we use in this case was a vehicle trip. So we said, well, if you're going to generate 1,600 trips and it's going to cost you $36 million to do it, that's basically $22,000 a trip. And that's still kind of an abstract number, but it is less than half of what option 1 is, where you've got only 300 plus trips, you've got $17 million at a price of $48,000 a trip. So in terms of investment efficiency, that's a question that should be considered. How much infrastructure do you really need to build for what you're trying to grow to? So that's one metric that could be considered. So going forward, if the city opts to pursue, growth in a specific instance, there's a range of compliance review and studies that need to be developed. This is just one illustration from the transportation side of things. There's a much larger range of trade-offs to look at than what we were able to do as a part of this. And then the last piece I kind of touched on already, but kind of looking at the funding opportunity analysis, how much of this can you get funding from other agencies? What's a reasonable amount that you can actually charge developers as a part of this process to make this a viable thing? I mean, if the fee is too high, it's going to constrain how many people are interested in actually making development like this. So that kind of assessment and those kind of trade-offs are ahead of you, if this is something you want to consider. So I think that's my last slide, aside from my thank you slide. So yes, any other questions or about this or whatever else ails you in the transportation world?
No, I think the only thing I'd like to point out is the study is inclusive of not just a single mode of transportation, it's multimodal, including bicycle, pedestrian, as well as other transit types. So I think it's important to point that out, that this isn't looking through a singular lens.
Right.
It's taking in various modes of transportation. So some people may hear it different. I just want to make
That
sure.
was actually my question was, when we say expand River Road to 5 lanes, are we talking 5 lanes, have a nice day? Are we talking protected bike lanes, sidewalks with buffers, greener? I mean, any of the things that we've been talking about for the last year and a half, 2 years, is that included in these 5 lanes, or is it, here's the base package, and if you want the deluxe?
No, I
So
mean,
to speak.
price-wise, we have included all those facilities in the cost, if that's the question you're asking.
Yeah, that's the question I'm
I mean,
asking,
I think
sorry.
these days, agencies are, well, I don't know, maybe I'm naive on this, but I don't think you can get away with doing just plain old motor vehicle improvements anymore,
I hope not.
right? I mean, that's just not what I've seen. I mean, like I said, I've been in Oregon doing this for 25 years, and even then you couldn't, it was a hard time to do 25 years ago. I mean, pretty much anything we do these days, it's all multimodal systems. In fact, what we find on the edge like this is the walking and biking system is so poor because it's all rural area out there. There's hardly anything there. So what you'll find is there's a lot of capacity available for motor vehicles because it's rural area.
Yeah.
But there's hardly any capacity for walking and biking. So the investment kind of flips a little bit. You have to kind of over-invest in biking and walking to make that area growth sustainable.
Okay.
Right? So it's a little bit different than if you were to grow or re-intensify or something at more to the city, middle of the city, where a lot of those streets are already built, the sidewalks are already in.
Right.
There's some kind of bike system or there's some kind of transit service. When you're on the fringe like that, it's kind of a different set of challenges.
Okay. Thank you.
Your trip counts for each of those growth options,
Yes.
are those generally reasonable worst-case scenarios for the uses that would be allowed in those zones?
I wouldn't put it that way. Those are trips estimates from the regional travel demand model that we use to do this analysis. I think if you came in with development applications that were allowed under that kind of zoning, the trip count would actually be higher because those kind of metrics that are derived through that process tend to be higher than what a travel demand model would tell you. So I would expect that they would be higher than what we illustrated here.
Okay, thank you.
So just one other question, and I apologize. I saw this number earlier in the state earlier, and I cannot remember it for the life of me. When you did the transportation study, what was the date range on that in terms of the vehicle count?
Base year?
I'm sorry?
The base?
Well, as far as because I'm assuming you set out the counters and all that kind of stuff in certain areas.
Well, when we did the counts, is that you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah, before COVID started is when we did the counts.
Is it pre in and out?
Pre in and out?
Yeah.
Oh,
The reason I ask is
Burgers.
I don't think anybody could have ever anticipated the volume of increased traffic we had over at Keizer Station.
Oh,
when they
pre
built
in and out, that in and out, okay.
That in and out. I didn't know either.
It's like, whoa, what?
Well, I think it's.
No, it wasn't pre in and out.
So it was
It
since.
was after.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was pre-March 2020, that's for sure,
Okay.
as far as the traffic counts.
That's good to
go.
know because I don't think anybody could have ever really anticipated just the volume
Yeah,
of traffic.
everything I've heard from those guys, that's a marvel they don't have a store like it that continues to attract as much volume as that one does. It's kind of, I don't understand it personally.
Outlier on the bill.
Go to Bob's.
I'm not saying anything comment about the food, but usually there's this surge when a brand new thing opens and then it cools down after a while, and that one really hasn't seemed to cool down a lot. That's what I was commenting on, not the quality of the food.
Fair enough.
All right. Any other questions of me? Otherwise, I'll step out the way.
Commissioner Keller, you got anything?
No, but I can tell you that when you're watching it on YouTube, you're 8 minutes behind.
Oh, wow.
But no, I have no questions. Thank you.
Well, Well, I think you did a good enough job on the presentation that obviously we don't have a lot of lingering questions other than probably the what's next, but that's probably something outside of the scope of your contract. But, the data was compelling. I like to look at numbers, and these ones just hurt my skull. But I think in your presentation, you painted a very vivid picture of the options and have given this commission a lot to think about and digest. So thank you very much for this wonderful presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay,
You're welcome.
Shane, what's next?
All right, so do any of you commissioners have any other questions from me? I mean, really, this has been one of those projects that, as I said at the beginning, it is a little bit more technical in nature. It's not advocating for or against expansion, but rather it's one of those pieces in kind of the puzzle of, as we make decisions moving forward, what route that Planning Commission and City Council ultimately see as being the right route for the city to move forward. And I mean, I know this project was kind of Nate's baby that got started quite some time ago to be a little bit of a litmus test and sort of putting some truthing to that cost benefit kind of analysis. And obviously before you do that, you got to kind of get an idea of, okay, well, if we grow by this much, how much is it going to cost? And then how do you end up paying for that? Does it pencil? So yeah, I mean, I think it's big numbers, clearly. And these long-range projects are somewhat difficult, I think, sometimes to comprehend of, well, what exactly does this mean for us anyhow? But I think it's really important. So I'm glad that Carl was able to be here and kind of walk through the report. The study itself is pretty easy to understand. The numbers, whatever. I'm not a traffic engineer either. But I do think this is one of those things that from a high-level planning concept and the things we've been talking about for the last year or so, is it does kind of illustrate that expansion growth, it's just more costly. So anyway, all that to say, if you guys have, the one thing I wanted to make sure you understood too is that those growth options that were created, those were created by our staff. Well, really they were created by Nate, but we utilized the housing needs analysis that we did in 2019 that identified what our needs were from population projection growth. So that's where we got ultimately the breakdown of acreage as to how big the growth pieces were. The one thing I did want to make sure to point out is, and now our new commissioners weren't here in January, but everyone else was here in January when we talked work program for this year. And one of the things Nate had kind of thrown in at the last minute was this concept of, well, what if we just expanded for just employment-based lands? Right. So that's what that option one represented. And again, it was one of those where we had to give the consultant some assumptions. And so we had to go with kind of the best information that we had. So those assumptions on that option one job land were based on the economic opportunities analysis from 2012 or 13, I believe it was, where we identified, I think it was, I can't remember how many acres of industrial and employment lands that we needed. And so we took that and then Nate, we kind of increased it, talked to the state, said what's a reasonable increase based on this additional population base. And so we kind of had to pick a number. Realistically, if we were going to go and do a full-blown UGB expansion and file an amendment, you would have to do an updated economic opportunities analysis to really truth what the need was. So those numbers could change, but this is basically trying to give all of you an understanding, and me an understanding of, okay, based on these assumed growth options, and it took into account, which we liked, it took into account the growth for the RCOD, the River Cherry Overlay District, assuming some additional units will be developed in the planning horizon in that area, it kind of took that all into account. So I wanted to make sure you guys were understanding that, because I know it can get a little bit foggy when you start getting into those numbers and whatnot. So anyway, yeah, I think that's it, unless you have questions for me.
I personally found it very interesting to look at the difference between the option 1 and option 2. I know option 1 is a general feeling that a lot of people want to see in the city, which is opportunity growth for jobs and those family wage jobs. I think the unintended consequence of that is then then more people are going to want to live here, right? And we have competing needs, both in terms of available housing, but also available opportunities for jobs. And so it's interesting to see the correlation between option 1 and option 2, and then the total cost associated with that, but also the cost per unit as a function of the overall growth. Gives some brain food, so it's quite interesting. Commissioner Grants.
I just had a general question. So I noted that in option 1, there was 517 multifamily units, all dedicated to the RCOD. And in option 2, that was cut pretty much in half. Is that generally because you assumed under option 1, that area would have to add that density because there was nowhere else for it to go?
Yeah, so the history of the assumptions were based on our housing needs analysis that wrapped up in 2019 that we can't adopt because we have deficits. And so that option 1 was specifically focused really on providing the employment land expansion, which, like I said, back in January it was like Nate's last minute add to my list of things we were going to do this year. And then it got all this traction. And, frankly, I think maybe it may have been a little bit oversold on that. Oh, it might be an easier, lighter lift to expand just for some employment lands. But it did become something that was, we've had that identified as a goal in Keizer to provide higher paying family wage jobs. And we have a job housing imbalance big time. And so it really looked at that as saying, hey, we're not going to expand for any residential lands. We're just going to expand for housing lands. And then the employment lands, not housing, employment instead. Thank you for the look, Matt. So what we did, though, is that when we adopted the RCOD, the River Cherry Overlay District, the state of Oregon had kind of done a high-level analysis on what could be assumed that we could accommodate with additional units as they redevelop and get built out in the planning horizon. Because we have a deficit in housing, a big deficit in multifamily, a big deficit in low-density residential. So we basically have a deficit across the board. And one of the things that we know, just inherently, is that with our shared UGB, because we share with Salem, there is capacity within the UGB to accommodate all of the need. And so one thing that is difficult is to make that argument for just straight line go for expansion. It's hard to meet those kind of litmus tests that the state has. And we've kind of talked about that. That's where the whole divorce conversation comes into place and whatnot. So what we were looking at, and Nate specifically was looking at and targeting is, well, if we were able to expand just for some additional employment lands and target that, and we're able to kind of leverage that need and that local desire and make that happen, what would that do to the transportation system? Could it, and so that's why that option was in there. It was assuming that multifamily need could be absorbed in the River Cherry Overlay District, because the state says we actually could absorb way more than that based on development patterns in Salem for mixed use. Now, the one thing about that assumption is that, as you know, we are currently just beginning a refresh of our buildable lands inventory and housing needs analysis to quantify those efficiency measures that we created in the River Cherry Overlay District. So that number, we don't have really the science behind it other than what the state did for that higher level analysis. And so that's why it was put there at the 517, essentially saying, okay, what could we fit in that River Cherry corridor? What if we were able to accommodate our multifamily need, and just the low density need would be something we couldn't accommodate within our boundaries? And so that's why it was selected, because generally in the shared area, there's a larger identified need for multifamily lands already in Salem. So the idea that they would be a willing participant to take on all of that need would be a little bit more difficult. Does that answer that? That was really long for that question, sorry.
That was more than just a yes or no.
Yeah. Does that make sense, though?
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing with option 2, though, is it, I think, allows for additional flexibility in terms of that mixed-use zoning opportunity and some of those cottage clusters, and having that more walk, ride feel to an area like that, where, option 1 as it is right now is where it is, but option 2 and 1 could be like 1.5 if we're going to play the number game. But you kind of get to sort of blend some of that in, which I think in turn could reduce some of the need, or at least thin out some of the need in the RCOD.
Yes, and I think, and ultimately that was kind of, I will just be perfectly honest, that number, as it got split, that was just straight innate czar-like wand of going, okay, let's just say half. I mean, that's just what it will be. And I think the reality is we will see what this update to the housing needs analysis and buildable lands inventory kind of shakes out. But in that RCOD document, in the Keizer revitalization plan, our market analysis element of that plan, and that's a big plan, big project, took us a long time, right? But one of the things in that market analysis that it talked about was whether or not redevelopment along River Road is going to happen and how quickly it might happen. And so that redevelopment rate of that, even that 517 units, I think was the number, it's pretty aspirational, I think, from the reality of what's actually built on River Road right now. And so I know that in my initial conversations with our consultant for the update, they've kind of questioned, do you really think you're going to be able to fit that on River Road? And so that's what they're being charged with, is to kind of truth that for us and say, okay, well, really, what is realistic? And so it may be, ultimately, if we got to the point of actually moving forward with expansion, these numbers, we had to go with the best information we had at the time. But ultimately, those numbers could be different. Instead of it may increase the acreage need, it may decrease the acreage need based on, what those, land needs are.
I guess one of the questions I should have asked Carl, I didn't think about it until now, was the assumptions are based off of current modal options now. I don't know that necessarily takes into consideration next gen, which I know in terms of the world I live in is a huge conversation for next gen aircraft and things like that. And as we see next gen technologies come in for standard transportation uses, I think it could significantly increase the cost depending on what that next gen technology comes forth with.
Carl is still here. But
I know we're not
I don't want to misspeak, but I think ultimately, yes, and Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, but their work would have been based on kind of the existing.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assumption. I always get into if we're going to plan, let's plan smart type thought process, and technology moves extremely fast.
Sure.
Now it's policy and everything else that lags behind, which I think inhibits technology from catching up to what the current applicable applications of different types of transportation can be. But I'm assuming Carl probably didn't speculate too much on that.
Just for my information, what is next gen?
Next gen is anything in terms of electric cars, different unmanned transportation systems.
Autonomous vehicles, all that.
Yeah, the kind of stuff that we're seeing a lot in like Dubai and things like that right now.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's certainly there and it's coming, but yeah, that was not a basis of what our assumptions were in terms of that growth area. Yeah, it would change. There's many changes that frankly we aren't good at predicting. Right, would your travel patterns, your basic travel patterns change as a result of that? Whole process, there's a lot of theories around, if you had a fleet of subscription cars that are available, well, it's like, having food delivered to your door.
Right.
Would your auto ownership change if you could subscribe to a car and get it on demand whenever you wanted it? And use it when you want, and then it goes away to somebody else when you're not using it?
Right.
So all those things are coming. They'll be here sooner than most of us expect. And no, that was not a part of our work.
Which is, yeah, Mr. City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since Carl didn't actually leave, I have a question.
Well, I was curious. I wanted to see where this was going.
And you may not be able to answer this because it's more of a legal question. It's always bad when the attorney asks the non-attorney the legal questions. But one of your slides was talking about, this is very early in a lot of steps if you choose to expand the UGB, and one of them had to do with funding.
Right.
And the question I had was, because I've never had the joy of actually doing what I would call a real UGB expansion. The only one that we've done is with the park, which is not a true expansion, not like this would be. Oh, to what degree do you have to show the funding? And I didn't think it had to be exact, but you had to show some ability to the state, to get approval for the UGB
As far as what
expansion?
the state requires?
Yes.
I'm less familiar with that end of it as opposed to the work that we do to support it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when we go through this process, we'll take that roster of projects and we'll break down what agency is responsible for it, what share of those projects can be attributed to local growth only, what part of that local growth total can you be reasonably charged through a fee program. A lot of times, if you're paying attention to the SDC fees, you guys know what SDC fees are, right? So how that's been handled up in the metro area is they do like overlay districts for that growth area. So like South Hillsborough, for example, has a special fee program just for South Hillsborough. Cooper Mountain has a fee program just for Cooper Mountain. That's on top of the citywide fee. And that's to help pay the incremental higher cost of a transportation system where there didn't used to be anything. So we sort out those buckets in terms of how this is really going to come together, so that not only the state but the local agencies can see, I think I can make a commitment like this for these kinds of projects. And the development community will see, man, is that really what it's going to cost for me to build a house in that area? Is that something I can work with? And those are all, it is really kind of a trade-off process that you have to go through. But even so, you've got, I can't remember, well, I think I do know your STC fee is about $1,500. Mm-hmm. Right, so in South Hillsborough, I think their overlay district fee just for South Hillsborough is $20,000 per house. Just for transportation, that's only transportation.
Yeah.
So but of course that's a different scale of development, right, than what we've been talking about. Those are, I think it's 30,000 people are gonna move to South Hillsborough. So, but yeah, so I'm not really answering your question because I'm not really sure what the state requirements are. I just know the kind of work that's done to support that decision is pretty detailed, so that all the people involved can make a decision and go, okay, I think we can live with this funding plan.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions for Carl? Sorry about bringing you back like that.
It's all right. I was about to leave, but I realized, no, I want to hear what they're going to say.
As we talked about that impact, Okay, one second. Recently they went through the process of doing multiple interchange options. I think one was in Aurora, one was at Brook Lake, and they looked at one down by Millersburg. And I think Aurora got it. But this would have a significant impact both at Brook Lake and also Keizer Station, which is already a nightmare. So just an observation there. Thinking about Brook Lake being a 2-lane road, I'm going, yeah, it ain't gonna work. But Commissioner Osler.
Yes, I'm glad you came back. I have a question. Your model didn't play with Wheatland and Clear Lake?
Didn't play, what?
It didn't,
consider
it
Wheatland.
it didn't bring in any numbers from Wheatland or Clear Lake?
Are you looking at the diagram with the line widths on it? Is that what you're looking at?
Yes, one of these where the red lines
Right.
equal thicker.
Yeah, that's just,
Well, they're all pretty much the same.
right, yeah, so that's not saying there's no traffic on it, but it's relatively less than the other streets.
I see.
That's what that's saying. When it's really small like that, we don't kind of highlight it as being a major route. But if you looked at it in detail, there would be some traffic using all the local routes to get where they need to go.
But it wouldn't be to exceed the capacity that those facilities would already be designed for,
Right.
essentially.
It's a very small amount,
Yeah.
so.
And Wheatland is already identified as one of the RTSP projects, so it wouldn't be a new project.
Right. Yeah, so it does assign trips on all those streets. We just didn't highlight them in that diagram because it was relatively small.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. So Shane, you've got a recommendation here that the planning commission makes a recommendation to council to approve the study, but we're not necessarily picking option 1 or option 2, correct?
Correct, because the study includes it includes both, so which is intentional.
Okay. So, okay. I guess in terms of just a question procedurally, Mr. City Attorney, with Commissioner Callier being on the phone, he's allowed to vote on this, correct?
Yes, he's allowed to vote under council rules. We're still in an emergency
Okay.
technically, and so you can have an entire meeting by phone if you choose to,
Okay.
and that is allowed. So yes, Commissioner Collier can vote.
Okay. Any further questions for planning staff or the consultant? Okay, then we want a motion, correct? Okay, so if anybody's got a motion for the recommendation to the city council to approve the Keizer Growth Transportation Impact Study.
Mr. Chair, I move we recommend that council approve the study as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Watson and a second by Commissioner Grenz to approve, to recommend for the city council to approve the Keizer Growth Transportation Impact Study as presented. Any discussion? I think somewhere Nate is smiling and is quite happy that this is going forward. I think it's an important, critical first step to looking at the future. I think it's important to note that we're not making any value judgments or expectations on the UGB discussion or expansion. This is simply taking a study to give the council tools to look at in that discussion. So we're not saying right now we're going for a land grab. This is purely informational. I want to make that very clear to the public. So, all right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Again, Mr. Springer, thank you very much. Shane, congratulations. All right. With that, we'll turn it over to our awesome city councilor, Councilor Kim Freeman. Thank you for being here this evening. What have you got for us tonight?
I don't have a whole lot. Just congratulations, Chair and Vice Chair. Welcome, Jane and Francisco. You guys are in for lots of fun work. So this is a committee I asked to actually be on because planning is not my background, and I can say it is very helpful as a city councilor. It's really nice to hear all the conversation firsthand. So then when it comes to council, it's like, I actually get it, right? So it's a lot of hard work, but it's really important work. So thank you to all of you, but welcome. Our next council meeting is Monday the 19th. I would encourage everyone to vote, and especially our home rule charter is on the ballot, so please make sure you are fully informed of that. It was a lot of work from the Charter Review Task Force Committee, and our illustrious city attorney and his assistant Tammy did some amazing work. So look for that. I want to encourage everyone, the neighborhood associations are back meeting. West Keizer's meeting here, and we're social distancing, and those are open to anyone. You don't have to live in West Keizer or Gubser or the Southeast Keizer Neighborhood Association. And then we have a work session this month on the 26th, which will be here at 6 p.m. And it's to continue our work from the 28th in the discussion around equity, racial justice work, and the inclusivity statement. So I've not seen the agenda yet, but we are having that, and those are open to the public. And so I would just encourage everyone to attend or watch from home. Thank you, Chair.
I think we should toss in like maybe 4 or 5 just random additional planning commission meetings so that Commissioner Freeman can get her absolute fill of the planning commission before she leaves. I'd like to say it's nice to see Dina here tonight. I know it's super exciting to see her email that comes through with the updated language in the after we get done, usually a couple months down the road, and we're reminded that we're doing really good work, and so it's always wonderful to get your emails, and so thank you for indulging us tonight and sitting with us, and it's nice to see you here with the Planning Commission tonight. Council Representative for Monday, October 19th, Commissioner Hostler, are you available for that?
Yes, Chair, I'll be available.
Okay, fair enough. All right, any other, by the ways, witty statements, remarks, comments? No? All right, well, again, Francisco and Jane, welcome. Thank you so much. Commissioner Watson, congratulations. All right, we stand adjourned tonight at 6:57. Yeah, as it was.
The next meeting says November 17th. Am I looking at the?
That's right, because the 11th is Veterans Day, so we've moved it back a week.
Well,
So it's a Tuesday versus
No,
a Wednesday?
18th.
Oh, is that, yeah.
I think it should be the
It should be
18th.
the 18th. I'm sorry
I'm not-
about that. I just said that to confuse everybody.
I think I said October, didn't I? I don't know what I said.
Okay.
Yeah, note that. Thanks for
Oh,
mentioning
yeah, I
that,
was
Kim. I was going to mention that, and I forgot.
Yes.
So that is the third Wednesday instead of the second Wednesday.
Go,
because
Debbie.
as Debbie pointed
I'm
out.
going to sign off, Debbie.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Hi, Mark.
For
Thank
the
you.
next meeting, you're
Bye-bye.
talking about, right? November 17th?
But it's supposed to be November 18th.
Okay.
It's supposed to be November 18th. Yes, I was looking at the 2021 calendar. I have them on both sides.
Okay. Well, we will re-stand adjourn at 6:59 this time.